Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are on the top of the hour. We are just waiting for Annamarie to join us as well. Seems like we have a bit of connectivity problems, but I'll kick off in the meantime. Welcome, everyone. Please let us know where you're from in the chat function. Please use the chat function to discuss what we're talking about, to ask questions. We'll pick them up. You can also use the Q&A function. We'll pick them up and answer your questions. Maybe just to kick off this morning's, today's webinar with a reminder of the various, hi Jenny, very nice to see you online, a reminder of ISO 37000 and how it's all constituted. In fact, I'm dialing in now from Frankfurt Oder in Germany at the ISO plenary meeting where we are discussing ISO 37000, but a lot of standards are being developed around 37000 now. But let me just give you a reminder of ISO 37000, and I'm just going to share my screen to show you the image, the picture. So just a reminder that in the center, the primary governance principle is the organizational purpose, and specifically ensuring that that organizational purpose, it's the organization's reason for being, has got long-term sustainability thinking built into it. And it's the only principle that's got two parts, the organizational purpose, but also the manner in which that purpose should be achieved, which is using the organizational values. So that very primary principle is right in the center of the organization. And in fact, we've got in the plenary meeting on Friday a new work item proposal to standardize the organizational purpose as a standard in its own right. The next layer of governance principles are the foundational governance principles. And these principles come from governance theory, sourced from the Professor Bob Tricker, Bob Carver, John Carver, Mervyn King, Bob Garrett. So these are the really fundamental principles. The first one being value generation, which I'll speak to a little bit later, which is slightly different from what they have in historic governance models. But under strategy, we have purpose. So those who are familiar with the King reports would know that it goes strategy, policy. In ISO 37000, we have governance policy under the strategy principle as a mechanism within which strategy is achieved throughout the organization. Then the traditional oversight and accountability, oversight with assurance and accountability through disclosure and transparency. The next layer of principles are the enabling principles. We decided in the working group, in the international working group, that it wasn't good enough just to have the foundational governance principles, but in the 21st century, we needed to provide some more guidance in terms of how those governance principles should be achieved. And the principles on the outer layer and the foundational, the enabling principles include stakeholder engagement, ethical and effective leadership, data, and specifically data for decision-making, as well as effective decision-making, risk governance, which is you would all be familiar with, and then two sustainability principles, one on the social responsibility, and the other one is viability and performance over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Of course, why are governing bodies doing this? It's really to more effectively govern their organizations so that the organization can achieve the outer circle, which are the three governance outcomes. So how do you know whether an organization is being well governed? Organization is being well governed by assessing its governance outcomes. How effective is the performance of the organization? How responsible are the organization's resources being stewarded, and also the world's resources, and then the ethical behavior across the organization. So just a recap, while Annamarie was coming on board, it was just a recap of ISO 37000. So welcome, Annamarie, nice to have you back.
Thanks, Carolyn, and apologies. Technology is your friend while it's working. And then when it decides not to work, you've been here, I think, a couple of times as well. So I'm actually I'm at not at my normal abode, and that's part of the problem. So we're reliant on the infrastructure around me. I'm dialing in today from the Consumer Goods Council Summit, annual summit here in Midrand, which is attended by a couple of hundred representatives of all the large corporates, basically, especially in consumer goods and fast-moving consumer goods industry, the retailers, the manufacturers, the suppliers, so it's very interesting to also see the topics on the agenda to pick up some of the conversation. Carolynn, one of the speakers this morning was our own Professor Mervyn King. And on leaving the venue, he did ask me to send you his regards and ask you
Thank
to
you.
please look after yourself there in Germany, because there's lots of work still to do.
Yes. Thank you.
He was very clear that please make sure you come back safely from Germany to South Africa, because he's got a to-do list for you. But
Oh, good.
he very- he spoke this morning here at the Consumer Goods Council Summit to these many, as I said, senior representatives of different walks of life in corporate world. And I wanted to just kind of maybe touch on one or two of the themes that have come through this morning, because I think it touches on what we're going to talk about today. The one thing that kind of two things that he really tried to explain to the audience was the fact how important an organization's business model is, understanding the purpose of the organization, which is what we talk about when we talk ISO as well. So we're going to touch on that, and he really tried to stress the understanding, understanding also not how the company makes its money, the value creation, how it creates value. And the other very important point and philosophical point he tried to get across was the fact that a company, is this incorporated? No, that's not right. It's this it's this
Incapacitated.
person. Thank you.
Mm.
That was what I was looking. Incapacitated. I can see you've been in his presence for a bit as well. This
Yes.
incapacitated person that is completely dependent on the leadership of organizations, which is another thing that we talk about in ISO. And he made a point. He said, if you want to attack something that happened in a company, don't attack the company, attack the leadership, because they are the decision makers. They have failed, the company and the stakeholders of the organization. So that was a very important fundamental, I think, message that he gave, that came across. But from the other addresses that were made, and also the questions coming and points made from the audience, one of the topics that's coming out very strongly, and the theme of the summit, is building together, being on the bridge, together, cooperation. A theme that came through very strongly, and something that's very close to my own heart as well, is the need for industries, even competitors, to get together on the one hand. So it's this whole theme about cooperation.
Oh, and we've lost Annamarie again. I was just getting excited there, the cooperation and collaboration. And it's something that we've debated here as well at the ISO meeting, is how far is collaboration from collusion? What is the difference between collaboration and collusion? And that's actually really interesting. It talks to conflict of interest as well. Also the environments in which conflict can occur. So conflicting business processes that actually are built in such a way that they promote conflict and conflicting ideas and conflicting interests. So it's something that is top of mind. I was talking about the different standards that are being developed around ISO 37000, and maybe just to mention a few, because they are on the points that Annamarie was making there. The first is, of course, the assessment of governance. So how do you know whether governance is whether your governance is being done well? And how do you explain that to your stakeholders? How can you know where to improve your governance? So those areas of guidance were needed urgently. on the back of the publication of 37,000. So the first standard we've put out now that will be published at the end of the year is ISO 37004. 37004 is a governance maturity model. And I authored that standard. And in fact, we're busy meeting at the moment to prepare for the publication of that standard and make sure that we have webinars available and supporting information available on the website to be able to take ISO 37004 and publish it. So maybe just a little bit of insights in terms of that measurement. It is a maturity model. So we have 6 levels of maturity, 0 being you're thinking about it, it isn't in place. And then the highest level of maturity is that you are continually innovating. You're always looking for how to improve, you're looking for new ways of doing things, not stuck in the old ways. So those 5 levels are just like you would have any kinds of levels of maturity are standardized across and will be standardized across all of the ISO standards in terms of maturity. So that's a spin-off piece of work, is actually working at agreeing across the standards what what maturity models look like. So we had to base it on a process maturity model, but we needed to bring in our own thinking from a governance perspective because we're dealing with boards and not process, different practices, different behaviors. But maybe just a little bit about what are we assessing in governance maturity. We're assessing 3 aspects. So I know auditors focus on whether you've got the documents or not. That's one aspect that we call efficiency. And it really is communication efficiency. So whether you are using documentation, if you have a documented policy or a documented process, a governance process, that documentation, a code of conduct, that documentation really is for communication purposes. So if you have a very large organization with 100,000 people across the world, you want to have everything documented so that you can be effective. And maybe it's not only documentation, maybe it's supported with short video clips and PowerPoint presentations and online training for employees. So it's the level of communication, it's the efficiency with which the governance decisions and the governance guidance from the board of directors or the governing body is embedded and integrated throughout the organization. And it's the efficiency with which that's done. Now, it's not appropriate for that kind of everything to be documented and reviewed, et cetera, if you've got an organization of 3 people. That's not responsible stewardship of your resources, because you have 3 people, everybody's got an idea of what it is, and if they don't know, they can ask the others, and it will actually move in a very agile way. The guidance that's coming, those governance principles that come through the organization. So even though we have the 6 levels, 0 to 5, 5 is not what you have to be at. You need to be at a level that is appropriate for the organization. So that is the one aspect, is efficiency. And what is appropriate for the organization in terms of the communication of the efficiency with which the governance decisions and guiding parameters are communicated throughout the organization. The second metric or measure aspect, governance aspect that we are assessing with the governance maturity model is that of effectiveness. So we have efficiency and we have effectiveness. Now I'm going to circle back on effectiveness because we've got another 2 standards that are developing around effectiveness. But just to say that effectiveness is, you've got the governance principles in ISO 37000, the 11 governance principles. What practices are you choosing as a governing body to apply those principles? Are they appropriate for the organization? So effectiveness is how effective is the governing body in applying those governance principles that are in ISO 37000. So again, all of these maturity models is very subjective, but there is guidance in the standard in terms of how to assess and reduce that subjectivity. The third aspect is governance behavior. And we've said it often in the South African context that good governance needs good behavior. And so how do you assess and measure governance behavior? And really what we're looking at is a level of understanding and education of the board as it pertains to the board's ability to govern, not specifically subject matters governing IT or governing environmental impact. It's governing according to ISO 37000. That aspect uses a learning hierarchy. We use as a fundamental premise the Bloom's taxonomy of learning, so the hierarchy of learning, where the very first level is recall. Now, you would know if you've seen children around and you remember from school that your first mechanism for education was rehearsing the times table. It needs to be in muscle memory, and that's called recall. So a very basic level of understanding, the very bottom level of governance behavior is, can you as a governing body member recall the governance principles that you are applying? Because if you can't, how can you say that you know what you're doing in terms of governance? You might have lots of experience, but what is your recall rate of that, of your ability to communicate your behavior when it comes to governance? So if organizations, if you find their governing body can't tell you what the 17 principles or 16+1 principles are of King 4, then surely that's an indicator that they don't really follow King 4. The next level up from that is an understanding of how to apply. So we get those lessons learned. We're using a learning hierarchy of learning to assess the governance behavior by the governing body. I'm really looking forward to the standard coming out at the end of the year. We have got a long plan of different webinars through different mechanisms. Love to be able to bring a little bit more of that into this forum. Certainly, we would be bringing some training around ISO 37004. I mentioned something about effectiveness. So these are two parallel standards that are being developed, and it's the indicators of good governance. So first of all, we had to understand what is an indicator? How do you define an indicator that's used by a board of directors, used by the governing body? We had a whole standard now, ISO 37005, that's all about, and it's still in working draft, it's all about defining the indicators of good governance, of what indicators that boards can use, that governing bodies can use. What makes a good indicator? Then the next standard, 37006, applies that to 37,000. It says this is what a good indicator looks like. Applying that to 37,000, this is what an indicator of good governance looks like. So there's been a lot of debate about how do the indicators of good governance align with the governance maturity model. And I'd like to use a very simplistic analogy, and analogies are always fraught with difficulties. But if you think about an income statement as being your indicator and a balance sheet as being your governance maturity level. So one is really in a point of time. It's a slice. So this is the level at the point in time. And then the maturity model says, this is where we've been and this is where we're going to. These are our plans for improvement, and this is how we've improved over time. So it's more like your balance sheet around governance as opposed to your specific, here is our indicator at the time of reporting. So that's how we're applying these two standards, but they actually work together even more closely. Now, 37,005 hasn't been published yet, which means that 37,006 will still be a long time coming as we apply those indicators. What is an indicator to governance? So it's actually talking to those indicators of good governance from 37,000. We'll talk to the effectiveness aspect. So it's the application, how the organization is, or the governing body is applying those principles in practice. So you know, if you've read ISO 37000, that it does give you key aspects of practice, but how do you measure the effectiveness of those key aspects of practice? And we use 37,006 to provide us with guidance on that. Now, 37,004, the governance maturity model, can stand on its own. It doesn't need 37,006. But if you want to get down into the real reporting on and measuring the effectiveness of the practices, you would be then applying 37,006. So that's a whole bunch of work that's being done by this technical committee to support ISO 37,000. And it's here we're in Germany today. We've been around the world with these meetings. And of course, through the pandemic, we had multiple meetings online and lots of debate. And it's really lovely working with the global experts that we work with in this forum. Other supporting standards in this technical committee include standards for anti-bribery management systems, whistleblowing management systems, and now recently conflict of interest, which is very, very interesting. So Annamarie, I see you back. We had quite a debate around conflict of interest as a standard, and that's coming on board now. But I was just trying to fill in terms of the supporting information. Do you want to carry on with what's happening at the conference? Because that would also give us other lenses on this 37,000.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, and apologies. I feel like a jack in the box in and out all the time. I've now on a different platform. I've kind of tried a plan B to connect. So hopefully it will give me more stability. And I kind of, because of all of this failed to just also welcome everybody in the room with us and to kind of say welcome to you from Germany as well, and appreciate you joining us on. And thank you. It's always so good to be on stage with you, because I just know, you've got it. So thanks for that. But coming back to my point that I was talking on when I dropped off, was on cooperation and the need. I mean, there is such I can sense it in the room. There is such a kind of I don't want to use the word desperation, but kind of that leaning towards that word, with the understanding and appreciation for how things are really falling apart, not only locally but globally as well. And we see with the wars going on, and the trauma and drama in the Middle East, etc., etc. And the need for us to come together, for us to cooperate, to address these things. And think of economics differently as well. I think the time of GDP and this focus on growth at the expense of Mother Earth and nature, is kind of moving on. We need a new kind of thinking on from an economics perspective as well. But also in the cooperation between business, government, and civil society. And there we have numerous challenges. And one of the speakers made a very interesting point about, he was one of the drafters of the NDP, and he kind of jokingly said, if you thought
The National Development Plan.
Yeah, the National Development Plan. If you think it was a good plan, he'll take all the credit. If you think it was not such a good plan, he will say, kind of blame my co-authors. But he then made the point that there was such support at all levels, in government, in parliament, at all levels, such support for that plan. But unfortunately, one of the key stakeholders kind of came up and said, while we agree with 95% of the plan, we don't agree with 5%. And as a result, was not willing to support the plan. And the point he was trying to make is, can we not, as society, as business, as government, as labor, get together and focus on the percent we agree on, and kind of deal with don't agree on differently. So the concept about, for me, the sustainable development, sustainability, ESG, then the fact that this needs to become really part and parcel of our boardroom talk, of our strategies, of how we think, of how we do, is really a very key theme from the conference here today, which I do think really supports the work. And just listening to a bit that I did listen now, the very important work that you guys are doing at the technical committee, because also being on the other side in boardrooms myself, wearing a non-executive director's hat, I must tell you that I really see the challenges in, to the point that you just made as well, the understanding of boards, It's kind of as though when you come with this talk into the boardroom, the kind of viewpoint or thinking reaction is, oh, here she comes with just, she wants us to tick boxes again. This is what it's all about. It's not reality. This is not the real life stuff. And so to really get that understanding at a board level, I think not only do we need the work that's being done at ISO, but also the work that's being done at the Good Governance Academy in infiltrating, so to speak, the curriculums and the material at varsity university business school level, to get that understanding.
Thanks, Annamarie. It is really important that we get that understanding through. Just as you were talking, it reminded me that in the technical committee, we actually wanted to call the standard the governance of sustainable organizations. But at that point, this was when we were busy drafting it from 2017 to 2020 odd. So the word sustainability was so politically or politicized that to put it in the standard would have been the wrong thing to do at the time. And see how far we've come now, where sustainability is, there's still the argument between is it ESG or is it sustainability? I think that argument is gone because people who argue about it are really just trying to distract you from the fact that it needs to happen. ESG is sustainability. And maybe just to mention, as you're emphasizing sustainability now as an important factor, and I mentioned ESG, environment, social, and governance. That's another term that investors use for the concept of sustainability beyond just financial sustainability. So those are other factors that need to be considered beyond just the going concern and financial sustainability. Last week, I was at the GEPF, so that's the South African Government Employee Pension Fund conference. And the GEPF, the Government Employee Pension Fund, is the largest investor on the African continent. And they held a conference which had brought in pension funds from America, Chicago, New York, California. These are huge, huge pension funds. And we had then on the stage, we had the three of them. We had the GEPF, we had the Eskom Pension and Provident Fund, which is the largest, GEPF is by an act of law, whereas the Eskom Pension and Provident Fund is the largest single pension fund in South Africa. And then we also had the Telkom Pension Fund representative there. So all the principal officers of all of these funds. And the question to them was, what keeps you awake at night? And they talk about this finding alpha, which is the nirvana of where you balance your investments and returns, et cetera, and they went round the panel, and I said to them, I couldn't resist. At the end of the talk, they said, are there any questions? And my hand shot up. I said, I can't believe that sustainability isn't top of mind for you as investors. I'd really like to be in the room next year because that's going to be your number one. It has to be the sustainability of your investments. I don't hear sustainability. You know what the one person responded, and I'm not going to say who it was. Oh, we spoke about ESG yesterday. You see, it's actually integrated to your point, Annamarie. You can't do one without the other. It actually is a whole it's the organization's DNA, and we need to account for our use of resources and our impact. So whether it's social impacts or environmental impacts, we've just never accounted for it. So it's true. Many people are upset because it's going to affect our price point, which is why they're having to, from an economic perspective, having to mandate the sustainability reporting. If you're online, if you've got more questions, Annamarie?
Yeah, no, I am online. Can you see me? Hear me?
I can hear you, but you are frozen.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, we'll try and give it a best shot. We also, please, for those in the room, if you've got any questions, please throw them in the Q&A in the chat, If I don't see them, I'll ask the back office to help me as well with those. But Carolynn, on the point that you just made, because I recall you also mentioned, I think the week next week you off to kind of an investment conference in Abu Dhabi, if I'm not mistaken, and it's really talking about investing and responsible investing. I think you can help me if I'm wrong, but also on ESG and the whole topic around is that. And listening to what you just said, which is quite disappointing for me to hear what you on the point that you just made, but do you really think that globally there is a real appreciation for sustainability in investing, the need to invest in sustainable organizations and companies, and what that actually means?
I think so. The response generally from the panel is yes, we do have a sustainability policy. It's just not a burning platform for them right now. The burning platform is the economy. The meltdown as a result of the Ukraine war, the other impacts in terms of the national impacts. Doesn't matter what country you're in, there's are national impacts around the supply chain because of Ukraine, the transportation, and of course now we've got the Middle East as well, so with Israel and Palestine. So I think the worry, their top worry is about the global economy. And in South Africa, we've just opened up that investors allowed to invest with Regulation 18, now 45% international, as opposed to the 35% it was before. So I think they are aware, but it's still sitting in a policy. It's still sitting as a thing that needs to be done. What I find generally, now I am generalizing because organizations, some organizations are very proactive in this area, but generally organizations are not treating it as the risk or opportunity that needs to be actively managed. I think we have moved forward in terms of risk. So if I just look at that risk governance principle in 37,000, we did move it a step forward to say that risk governance isn't only governing the risk management in the organization and directing risk management. It's not only setting your appetites and tolerances and adopting a enterprise risk framework. It's also the governing body themselves practicing effective risk management. So I think we have stepped a step forward in that risk is not just insurance. So there's not only an insurance response to risk, but sustainability really is a risk issue. Peter Duffy, who's the technical committee chair of the ESG Exchange, he often says, ESG is just old risk in a new wine bottle, so just old wine in a new bottle. It's actually all the risk management disciplines just packaged slightly differently. We had it with IT as the previous wave with technology, and now we're seeing it with all of the AI, generative AI tools, etc. It is a new risk. We had it previously, cybersecurity still with us as an issue. And now we have it with sustainability. It is a risk. But if organizations and specifically governing bodies, if they can build in sustainability into their decision, the understanding risk and opportunity of sustainability into their decision making, which is what 37,000 says, I think we'll be a lot better off. But at the moment, I see the governing body they've done the policy, management has drafted a policy, governing body has adopted it, but I don't know if the rubber's actually hit the road yet. And I'm generalizing. I know some organizations are very proactive. And I know other organizations such as BlackRock have been very proactive ahead of the curve and now suddenly started dialing back. So, and you need to ask yourself why. They're suddenly dialing back now. So it is an interesting space, and it's an interesting question, Annamarie, that are investors really adopting these principles for responsible investing?
Yeah, and for the right reason. And, you know, to the point that you just made, Carolynn, on sustainability, we hosted a
We're losing you.
on climate change. And one of the things that we discussed at the, or that kind of came up, was the fact that there are two, and I'm hoping you can hear me properly because I see my connection is unstable. But for there's two kind of go back to the boardroom level sustainability risk that you just touched on. On the one hand, boards need to look at how do we as an organization, how can we limit our impact on, you know, on climate change, do our part to try and reduce our negative impact on the environment, etc. But on the other hand, what also needs to be part of the strategy is how do we adapt? How do we, to use the COVID word, pivot? Because the climate change is a reality. We can slow it, hopefully slow it down, etc. But you know, the reality that things are going to change, which will impact our way of operating, is a reality that we cannot ignore. And the longer we kind of, like the ostrich, take that ostrich approach with our head in the sand, you know, the bigger the risk becomes. So they, you know, for example, building now, if we look at our strategy, building a factory, I think was what Dave was one of the examples he mentioned, next to a 100-year flat line. You know, that 100-year flat line these days are now kind of exceeded every 10 years. All of a sudden, you know, so we also need, and I don't always think that that penny has really dropped with our boards as well, to understand that it's not only about trying to do what's right in the way we operate as a business to reduce our footprint, etc., but also starting already to look at our business model and the way we operate to adjust and adapt to what is coming our way in future.
I think that's such an important point, and it's, you know, sustainability is baked into ISO 37000, and maybe for those on the webinar, you know, 37000 incorporates sustainability and what boards need to do, or governing bodies need to do around sustainability. I'm just going to share that diagram again and take you through it in terms of the model. So let's just start with the purpose. And I did mention right in the beginning that the purpose and the guidance, the key aspects of practice around purpose, do talk to making sure that you take a long-term view, making sure that you consider sustainability factors, society and the environment as well, when you're defining your purpose, the organizational purpose. So there is a recommendation in 37000 that you do revisit your purpose and make sure that it always applies with the current context that the organization operates within. The second aspect in terms of, I'd just like to call out in terms of sustainability, is this concept of value generation. Now, in the course, you'll hear that value generation is new. It's a new concept and principle in the governance of an organization. Value generation here, its foundations come from the International Federation of Accountants, the CIMA and CGMA. And there, really, they called it value creation. The International Integrated Reporting Framework talks about the business model, and Annamarie, you mentioned it earlier, the business model and creating value. Now, you know, as you say, this is consensus building internationally. So we felt that because value creation was one of the steps, and we need to also think about preservation, erosion, etc., we coined the term value generation because it's generating value. And very importantly, that includes stakeholder engagement beyond just shareholders. And what it says is, before you even get to strategy, before you even determine the strategy of the organization, between purpose and strategy, in effect, I mean, these things are done in parallel anyway. In between your organizational purpose and your strategy, you should be open, transparent, and explicit on your value generation objectives for each of your stakeholder groups. Now, although the environment, the natural environment, is not necessarily a stakeholder, it's one of the considerations in terms of the generation of value. And It's just in recognition, being transparent before you even go and generate that value through your strategy, etc. Before you even get there, you're upfront to say, we need to balance our legitimate stakeholder needs, wants, and expectations. And how do we balance them? You guys are going to get more, and you guys are going to get less, and you guys are going to be negative. We're going to take from you, actually. So this is guiding the boards to be upfront and explicit on what are their value generation objectives for each of the stakeholder groups, including the natural environment. So then civic society and other stakeholder activists will know exactly what the board has decided for the organization, what the governing body has decided for the organization. So there's no surprise when the dividends are set out, because then the board actually said, I'm going to take from the natural environment and I'm going to give the dividends to the shareholders, because they're being upfront and transparent about it. Now, has this been tested? And I think most organizations, most boards are very hesitant to put this out front, to say before they've even generated any value, because there's going to be a big argument, but rather have the argument up front to be honest and transparent than to beg forgiveness afterwards. So I know that that's a model that many people say, well, we couldn't do this and we couldn't do this. And yes, we took from the environment. And yes, we didn't invest as much as we should in corporate social responsibility because we needed to pay dividends. And actually, before you even do that, you've said it up front. Have the argument up front, because it's a far more honest way of doing business. There's more integrity involved. So those are the first two foundational sustainability practices, really. And of course, value generation needs to be over the long term. And as we were talking, the asset managers talk about generation of value over the long term, but pensioners are retiring every year. They're wanting their returns this year. But the other two enabling principles that we had a long discussion around that are really the sustainability principles are the social responsibility, which we don't see. We see corporate citizenship in King 4, which is a bit like social responsibility, but it has a lot more in it. And we had a long debate about whether these should be one or two principles. And to your point about the 95 and 5%, we thought, we've got the foundations of it, whether it's 11 principles or 10 principles, or whether you spell out social responsibility, really, let's just get the standard out there sooner rather than later. We can address this later. So South Africa's position was that there should be one principles, as you can hear, but it doesn't really matter. Social responsibility, as we can understand, talks to that corporate citizenship principle. But here comes a very interesting insight and what the ISO 37000 did way back in 2021, before the International Sustainability Standards Board was established, before the IFRS Foundation published their sustainability standards, which is now they published in June. We baked in to ISO 37000 the recommendations from the Brundtland Commission. And part of that was leveraging off the work of the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, but also considering what the Financial Stability Board was doing in their task force for climate-related financial disclosures, which then has now become part of the SASB and ISSB. So let's just unpack those acronyms quickly. So SASB is the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which then became the foundation for the IFRS's sustainability standards. Now, the difference between GRI and ISSB standards and SASB standards is the GRI was looking at the organization's impact on society and the environment. So those non-financial, so to speak, impacts that the company needs to treat as a material matter, as something of importance. And then the SASB standards and now the ISSB standards talk about the impact on the organization by society and the environment. So talking about the 100 flood mark, that's the impact of the environment on the organization and the organization's financial stability. So we baked into 37,000 both aspects, and now we call both aspects together double materiality. Materiality being what is important for the organization. So on the one side, it's both aspects. So it's from the organization's impact on environment and society, and the environment, that's the inside out. And then the outside in is the environment and society's impact on the organization. And under viability and performance over time, we're saying that good governance means taking into consideration both aspects as being important for the organization. Now, this is going to fly in the face of the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, which really only talk about the impact, the outside in, the impact of the environment and society on the organization. So countries adopting, so SIPC in South Africa has already announced that we're going to have S1 and S2 have to be applied in the 2025 reporting year. So by 2024, there's the adoption, and for the 2024 financial year to be reported in 2025. So there we have the climate impacts on the organization. But we hear as good governance is actually also the other way around. So that, I think, is the two other sustainability principles. Of course, risk governance, and I spoke about that. How does sustainability work from the governance outcomes? Of course, there's your responsible stewardship of resources, thinking about your resources as more than just financial, but absolutely financial resources. So economic activity, social activity, and environmental activity. So responsible stewardship of financial, the 6 capitals really, financial, human capital, intellectual, manufactured, natural capital, and social and relational capital. So really stewarding those resources well. And what does it mean to just steward those resources well? Well, there's your value generation principle, being upfront with who's going to win and who's going to lose, because there are going to be winners and losers. And then your effective performance really talks to that, with a recognition that that performance relies on those capitals. And then the ethical behavior also talks to sustainability, to make sure that you've got a long-term perspective, a long-term horizon. It's not just short-term returns. So just to add a final point, one of the questions I'm often asked is, what about special purpose vehicles? They're only created for financial reasons, for structuring, financial structuring reasons. So that's an easy one to answer, actually, because that goes to the purpose of the organization. If the purpose of the organization is to be there for a short period of time for financial structuring only, well, there is your purpose. It is specifically for that purpose. And all of these principles do still apply. It's just a very narrow purpose. I see you back. Lovely.
Yeah. So Carolynn, and thanks for that. I've been managing to follow that as well, and kind of starting to wrap up. And I don't know whether there are any questions or comments from the participants, but listening again to what you were saying now on the double materiality, but also on the reporting side. So I don't think many people realize and appreciate that the IFRS 1 and 2 reporting that CIPC has indicated that is going to become kind of law in this country for companies to now also do this non-financial, in inverted commas, reporting, albeit, to your point, still very limited extent that we would like to see it. But that in itself is kind of a regulatory dynamic that's going to force us into a direction. But going back to the point that I started with this afternoon, and which is really because of what I've been hearing morning and listening and kind of getting cautiously optimistic when I hear, the kind of language and the questions and the comments being made in a room with hundreds of people in the corporate world. I think what we have to understand, and the reality is that companies needs to make profit. Let's just start there. So I think with Paul Druck kind of said that profit is like oxygen. And, so you can't live without it. But he said, if you think that profit or that breathing is all that life is about, you are missing a lot. You're missing the point. You're sorely
Mm,
mistaken. In other words, profits, but it's making it a manner that is responsible to planet and people,
mm,
in a responsible manner. And so I want to really, because of that, say that for me, the world has changed. And for that reason, we need new thinking, we need new leadership. That is why the work that is being done by ISO in this regard to me is so, so crucial. And ISO 37000, it is a framework, it gives us, it's a starting point. And why I'm very excited to hear about the work that's coming, because I do know that it's difficult to kind of make this tangible for people. They still have these philosophical conversations around governance and sustainability and things. So, I do think we need these practical kind of tools, not to a tick box checklist mentality, but just to help guide us with the implementation. Because ultimately, and that was Mervin's point this morning again, the idea is to achieve certain outcomes. The idea is not to meet regulatory, well, obviously you have to comply, but that's not the first and foremost. What we do as leaders is try and achieve an outcome where our organizations are trusted, to the point that you made earlier about being transparent, being upfront, telling not only the good news but also the bad news. While you were talking, I was thinking about somebody who mentioned that they saw an annual report which started with what went wrong this year. I said, what a refreshing, different
yes.
approach to reporting. Yeah, let's start off by saying where did we drop the ball this year? And I think we can all learn a bit from that. But that we it's that kind of the outcome on the legitimacy and on the trust that we want to create with our corporations, the value we create, and understanding what value creation really means. There's a lot of education that's need to be done with our boards as far as that is concerned. And then the effective control part, and
Mm,
especially if I talk King 4 quickly, very few people really, I don't think the penny has really dropped with the majority, that a document like the King 4 report is a tool for leadership. It's not and here I'm kind of talking the controlling mind of the company, being the board of directors. It's a tool for them to enable them. It's not a foolproof guarantee, because there is none such guarantees, but it is a tool to enable them to improve or strengthen their control, over the organization and its affairs, because ultimately they're accountable. Ultimately, the buck
mm,
stops with the board. And this is where I think, for those on the call as well, I really want to encourage you. I want to appeal to you to really work hard in your sphere of influence, to kind of be the messengers, the prophets that really takes this message out. And that's why it's so important that if you haven't done the ISO kind of the online course, that you do that. It's a starting point. It gives you the platform. There's a lot still coming our way, and if you don't get that platform right, then all of these other things are going to be like noise and curveballs that you don't understand where it fits into the bigger picture. So I think
mm.
from that perspective, Carolyn, I don't know what your views are, but that to me is so important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I'd also like to mention, you say that things are changing all the time. So people might have noticed that the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development, as you say, profit is the oxygen of the company, but it's not the only thing. The OECD recently published its corporate governance principles. And so a lot of people ask me, how are those different from the ISO 37000 principles? Because, I mean, the first question that came out when ISO 37000 came out is how is this different from the regulations that we have in our country, or the codes that we have in our country. So I think we've addressed that, but how does this relate to OECD? So I just wanted to maybe just a whistle stop on that the OECD is all about, it's a national level policy. So OECD, it's the cooperative development of nations. So those corporate governance principles, and I love that they've come out with a new set, is they are really saying to countries, you need to have effective mechanisms in place to promote good corporate governance. So like in our laws, we've got things like you need to have an audit committee is actually legislated for companies. So those are the kinds of recommendations that the OECD comes out with, to say in your legislative framework, these basics have become of corporate governance have become so basic that they need to be in your laws. Now we know that governance is more than compliance. Governance is both what you must do, which is compliance, as well as what you should do. So it's more than compliance. So it's great to see the OECD lifting the level of what you must do, and actually keeping pace with the need for continually improving governance of organizations, and that they're saying these are the basics that you need in place as a must do. So just to put people's minds at rest in terms of how the new OECD principles actually relate to 37,000. So 37,000 very much the governance of organizations, whereas the OECD is providing guidance to nations about how they need to be setting up the correct environment so that organizations can apply 37,000 effectively. Because we know in the difference between King 2 and King 3 is marked, because many of the recommendations that were in King 2 became part of the New Companies Act in South Africa, and which case then they were dropped from the King reports into legislation, and King 3 came out with really a very different approach, because that had been made law now. And so it is good that governance codes and legislation work hand in hand, but you do need to get an international norm of a support for good corporate governance across every country.
No, I hear you. I must say, personally, for me, it's always sad to see that the legislator believes that it has to intervene to kind of, encourage governance with a stick. Because, to me, I've always believed that those out there, the unethical leaders of this world, they will find ways to kind of, window dress, or to kind of find loopholes in the law. And it will never be, the law will not be applied with the right mindset, understand why it's being done. So it really is then a tick box exercise. And that is sad, but we are the authors of our own misfortune. Unfortunately, as far as that is concerned, I think, so we are just kind of receiving, I think, what we kind of deserve, which is a pity, but it is the reality of what we live in. I want us, we coming to wrap up. I saw something the other day that on this point about tick boxing as well, and compliance, the compliance approach to this, and it becoming more law, etc. I saw something which was quite profound for me, or made me kind of think, we often, when we all try and, let me put this way, I have difficulty trying to sometimes explain why there is a need for policies and procedures and, those kind of tangible things. Because you say it's not a checklist, tick box, but here you come and tell us, ask me where's my charter, where's my work plan, it's, etc. But the point that was made that I read was, understand that if you want to create the right culture in your organization, you need to support it with processes and procedures and policies, etc. So it is the foundation of getting the right culture. In other words, in the absence of that, your culture may be short-lived. You know, the right culture may be very short-lived because you put the organization at risk by not putting proper processes and procedures. So I do think, as much as we talk, we want people to buy into the philosophy of good governance and, you know, responsible corporate citizenship and all of those things. We must understand that it also brings you know, ticking boxes that we have to tick to support and lay the foundation for the right culture. Carolynn, we've kind of run out of time.
We have. It went very quickly.
I've not seen any comments in the chats or the Q&A. Apologies, seems like my plan B brought a little bit more stability. If it wasn't too great, I really apologize for that. Thank you always. As I say, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you in the room, and enjoy your last bit of Germany. Travel safely back home. For those of you on the line, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you haven't done ISO, please make sure that you start there. It's very important, as hopefully Carolynn and I have kind of convinced you today. And for the FluidRock team behind the scenes, thank you for, as always, for your work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Annamarie. Thanks, everyone.